I
want
finished
you to
watching
show.
Picard early this morning, and I was super happy. So I'm not going to
You
say any
already
spoilers.
finished it?
It was just one show. It was just one episode. I watched it like as soon as it was available on Crave.
I haven't even started watching it. I don't even know where I can watch it. Tell me where I can watch it, Joe or Renee. Go.
CBS All Access.
I don't have CBS All Access.
Except in Canada, where I have CBS All Access, but because they're terrible, they licensed it to Crave, which is Rogers, and so I have to wait an extra day and then watch it on Crave like an animal.
You know, I'm actually, I was about to give you some crap and say I'm not sympathetic to you, but you don't get the Studio Ghibli stuff on Netflix either, right? It's not coming to Canada or the US. Those are those Miyazaki movies.
We might have them on some other service. Like the thing is that Bell and Rogers bought like the rights to everything forever a long time ago in some giant colossal galactic war. And now we're just suffering the consequences of that. And you need cable login to watch half the stuff. And I refuse to have a cable account just to log into online streaming services.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I know. That's right now. That's kind of like
the TV app will kick me out. Like I'll subscribe to something online. I'll go to press the button. It'll say, oh, sorry, in Canada, this has to go to the global app. Kick me out of all access, send to global, which will then say, oh, you need a cable login. And I will start setting things to fire.
The future, ladies and gentlemen. We're living in the future. No. Isn't it wonderful?
So great.
Let me.
But I'm happy to see you guys.
Yeah. Talk about and.
I have a bunch of fake meetings with Lori Gill now. CTC is Cinnamon Toast Crunch, Lori, in case you were wondering what happened.
Oh, noms.
Yeah.
Okay. And that is going to be, let's see, what can I say?
It takes two to make the things go right. It takes two to make a mad. I was watching the history of rap again last night for some reason because YouTube serviced it, and that algorithm, man. You fall asleep and you wake up to the damnedest things.
It understands me in a way that I find worrying.
So scary.
I always will like see something that looks cool, but like not click on it because I don't want to mess with the algorithm that I've already established. Like if I click on that, then that means I'm going to get shown 500 different things that are related to it. And I don't
see, like George or Anthony will be over and they'll watch a YouTube video and then I'll have like car recommendations or like a whole bunch of other stuff for days.
Okay, I'm going to get us started now. Excuse me. You guys ready? Ready. Okay. Whew. Good afternoon. Today is Thursday, January 23rd, 2020. And today we're going to talk about end-to-end encryption, the iPad turning 10, and a whole lot more because this is the iMore show. And joining us today, as always, is the wonderful head boppin' Renee Ricci of Vector. How you doing today, Renee?
Good. Like I was saying in the preamble, I'm not going to give any spoilers, but I managed to sneak in Star Trek Picard first thing this morning, and I was super happy. So they got off to a good start.
Yeah, that sounds pretty exciting. I've been holding off on using my free trial for is it CBS or ABC All Access? CBS All Access. And maybe now is the time, or maybe I need to wait for the rest of the episodes of Picard to come out, and then I'll just like binge watch as much as I can.
The line must be drawn here, this far, no further. You will watch CBS All Access.
And no offense, but I just don't want to pay for CBS All Access other than for like one or two shows. So like,
binge this, and it's worth binging Discovery. There's like 2 seasons of that.
Yeah. That's the other one that I've kind of been holding off on. So, also joining us on the show, who told me how to find Picard, is it's the special guest today, senior editor of iMore, Joe Keller. Welcome to the show, Joe.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Excellent.
Joe's like the glue that helps iMore go, especially when Lori's away for any reason. Joe just manages, makes sure everything happens. It's amazing.
And Renee calls him Darth Vader.
But he might sue me soon. Like now we have an HR department. I have to be careful.
It's alternately Darth Vader or the Emperor. It really depends.
Well, it's just because the minute Lori leaves, like she goes to take care of the Galactic Senate, I just hear the Imperial March and Joe's shuttle arrives. And then I'm not sure he'll ever relinquish power.
I am the Senate.
That was good.
That was amazing.
All right. So the big news this past week is actually about 3 weeks old at this point, but the story kind of keeps growing and kind of, like the Kraken is starting to overpower our existence. So Let's just do a quick little rundown. Renee, you can kind of give us the major details, but there's a lot of information right now that we're talking about that has to do with end-to-end encryption. The fact that Apple does not end-to-end encrypt our iCloud backups, and recently added to the story, the fact that Google apparently is starting to or already did. Give me some background, Renee.
So Google does. So most places don't. So I'll try to make a long story short. Apple nobody really originally thought about this stuff. Like, this was before we had two-factor authentication. And then we had that huge leak of celebrity photographs. And that was mainly people who were either reusing passwords, brute forcing passwords, or using security questions that they could find on Wikipedia to gain access to celebrities.
So what do you mean by that, real quick?
So let's say, like, I wanted to find, I wanted to get into the backup of some famous celebrity so I could steal all her pics. I would try to guess her password. Maybe she had a password on Home Depot that got hacked and I tried the same password. Or maybe she had security questions. I'm saying she because there was very, very few men that this happened to. It mostly happened to women. They went to Wikipedia and they said, like, what road did I grow up on? Who was my first pet? And they could find all that information online, so they could reset the password. And that became a huge scandal. So Apple implemented two-step authentication, the original version. And what happened then is they gave you a recovery key. And if you lost access to your account, you had to use that recovery key to gain access to it. So if you no longer got the token, if you forgot your password, they told you to write down or print out and keep it somewhere safe. But
I still have my authentication key in a box under my desk right now.
See, you're one of the few, because most people just lost them, and then they would go to Apple and they'd say, "Help me!" I have the messages from when my fiance, proposed to me. I have like the photographs of the baby.
God, text
I have all
messaging a
these
proposal.
things. Yeah, well, I mean, like, they just all these things that were their life, and it was gone. It was basically destroyed.
So why
Apple,
was it gone?
because Apple couldn't recover it for you. If you didn't have that recovery key, there was just no way to get back into the account. It was just a pseudo-random blob of bits that nobody could reconstitute into real data, because that's what the key does. It basically unlocks the encryption. Maybe if you had a trillion years, you could piece it back together on your own, but it's theoretically just gone. Mm-hmm. So Apple replaced that with a new two-step authentication system. And what that did was make it so that if you went to an Apple store and you proved, and you proved ownership of the device or the account, they could unlock it for you. But in order to do that, Apple had to keep a copy of your key. And there's two very different theories at work here. There's something called fail secure, which means that if everything goes wrong, it locks down. And that's what it was before. If you lost the key, everything went wrong, your stuff was secure. And for a few people, that's really important, like spies, dissidents, master criminals. I mean, there are some people who it is more important to them that the data never be seen by anybody else than that they have access to it themselves. But for the vast majority of people, the odds of the pictures of my kids being the pictures of my kids being stolen, or the damage from the pictures of my kids being stolen, is infinitesimal compared to the damage of those pictures being lost to me forever. So the news process, Apple could get into it, but because Apple could get into it, the FBI was then able to subpoena it, because Apple couldn't say, "Hey, we have no access." And it's important to understand that Apple does no access, zero knowledge, for almost everything, including your health data, your passwords, the end-to-end encryption on messages, on things being synced, all of that end-to-end encrypted. Even Apple can't get in. But in this case, for the backups, they determined that the greater harm was not being able to help people recover their data. So they made that, and that's standard. Like, Dropbox has the same policy, and Edward Snowden has criticized them, and they say, people lose access, but it also enables web features. So if you want to see a picture on the web, or you want to do a search for something on the web, they can't do that unless they can get into your account to search it or to show it to you. So there's both features and fail-safes that it enables. So this is pretty standard. Google recently, just decided they were going to encrypt backups. So if the FBI asks them for the backup, they go, "Here you go, complete encrypted binary blob. Good luck with that." And you can recover it as long as you have your Android device. But if you lose that, you lose the access to your backup. So they made a different set of choices than Apple and Dropbox.
So with Google, that's kind of the big news now, is that people are saying Google did it, so why isn't Apple? So do you know the details on what that means exactly? So in the case of end-to-end encryption for us way back when it was two-step authentication, we had a very long string of letters and numbers that became our
It's
key.
like 4 sets of 4 letters and 4 numbers. So it was not
And
really
then-
human readable.
Yeah. And then, so what Google has done is your key is your Android device.
Your PIN code on your Android device gets, I believe it gets commingled with a longer key that is stored in your Android device, but you still need the PIN code, which means Google can't get in because they don't know your PIN code.
So this does kind of like, it does kind of add to that, that fear of losing everything on your phone, but Google is kind of just choosing right now, at least, to do this. They think that this is the right step into
And you can't
end-to-end
opt out.
encryption.
Like all of our mutual friend Jerry Hildenbrand just wrote an article saying it'd be nice if you could opt out to this stuff, or if Google could make a service, because all credit to Lori. I told this story before, but Lori a couple of years ago said, Renee, it's World Backup Day. I need you to go and do this whole thing on backups. And I contacted a couple people, but Dave Nanian really sticks to mind. He makes a super duper. And I'm like, how do I encrypt my super duper backups? And he's like, I will tell you, but it's non-obvious, and please don't do it, and don't tell other people to do it, because once they are encrypted, if anything happens, if there's a fire, if there's a flood, if you drop it, if the drive fails, your stuff is gone. And most people back up stuff that's emotionally important to them, not like criminal, like all that kind of stuff. So I want to be like very careful in saying, I personally really want Apple to go. I want Google to have the option not to encrypt. I want Apple to have the option to encrypt. I would rather neither of them have it set to default. And I really want this option, but I would never use it. And I don't think 99, like if you are a spy, a criminal mastermind, or a dissident in a draconian regime, you absolutely need this. They should provide it. Or even if you just have a deep privacy philosophy, you should have the ability to do it. But for most people, most of the time, the risk of damage is just so great that they shouldn't do it. And it really shouldn't be a controversy, because it hasn't changed in like 5 years.
So Joe, tell me a little bit about, what do you think about this? Like, do you think that we should have end-to-end encryption on our iPhones? Do you think that it should be automatic, or do you think that it should be an opt-in? Do you think it should be on by default and people have to turn it off? Like, what do you think about this? I know that privacy and security is very important to you.
Well, I'm kind of on the same page as Renee here, where I think an option is absolutely essential to have, but it shouldn't be on by default, just because more people than not will run into the problem of I can't get my stuff if it's already locked down and they, lose their passwords. The amount of the number of times that we've had to change, say, my mom's password on one of her accounts because she has a bunch of different ones written down in a book, and she can't remember what goes where.
Oh God.
I can't really count it on any number of fingers or toes.
Yeah. So like, speaking to our moms, like Joe, you can kind of attest to this too. I think we have very similar parents here. The idea that your mom would have to somehow be the keeper of that key.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She wants as little responsibility for the sort of background stuff as possible. And I don't know, I think turning an end-to-end encryption on for backups by default would be detrimental to her and people like her.
So does your mom, and I'm only kind of referencing the mom in the same scenario, that I think all of us understand that as smart as we think we are when it comes to phones, there are lots and lots of people who don't have the kind of knowledge that we do. So I say moms, but mom is just sort of a stand-in for most people. Joe, does your mom know that her iCloud backups are not end-to-end encrypted? Does she know that Apple could actually access them and could actually give those backups to the FBI if they were asked?
I think to the extent she thinks about them at all, I don't think she really thinks about encryption in the least. And I think she probably figures that Apple could do something like give them to the FBI if they become necessary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm not sure it's something that she's particularly bothered by, but I haven't had that particular conversation.
There is one extra thing worth pointing out because, and even the Reuters article did this, and they sort of frame it as hypocritical for Apple to lock down the iPhone completely, like it's totally, and it's a little crypto brick, and not want to allow the FBI into that, but not lock down iCloud backups and be willing to hand them over. But the thing is that they are completely different situations. They're different contexts. Apple has said a few times the reason they lock down the iPhone so much is because you're much more likely to drop your iPhone in a cab when you're getting out of it, to forget it in a bar, ironically, to have it stolen from you, to leave it behind, to have like someone who's visiting the household just pick it up. So they want to make because the likelihood of theft there is so much higher. There has never been a successful exfiltration of keys from an Apple server, as far as I can tell. That is incredibly unlikely. It's like breaking into a bank vault as opposed to just getting something that's lying around your house. So they're much more they're doing both based on what's best for the customer. So the thing that's in your pocket needs more protection than the thing that's locked away on a server somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think, when it comes to the Reuters discussion, it's funny, Renee, I think you and I almost had different feelings when we were reading the article. We both are coming to the same conclusion at the end, but I was reading this article from Reuters as, to me, it was like they were taking the angle that Apple is actually doing a good thing. That's almost the way I felt like they were explaining the fact that our iCloud backups are not end-to-end encrypted. Basically just, everybody, you're making such a big deal because Apple isn't giving stuff to the FBI, but guess what? They actually are. And they decided to do that a long time ago with the FBI. So shut up. That's kind of the way I read into it. But then I started reading a lot of stuff on the Twitters, on the social medias that were, it kind of like spun the story that I was reading into a completely different story, which is, oh my God, Apple's been lying to us all this time, telling us that our stuff is safe and encrypted and this and that. And guess what? It's actually not. Joe, were you surprised to learn? Actually, I don't think you were, because I think you've actually been kind of having the same discussion with Renee for a very long time, which is that this is something that Apple should allow as an opt-in. What did you think when you kind of saw a lot of people who were going, I didn't know that my iCloud backups weren't end-to-end encrypted. I thought they were. Apple made me think they were.
Well, I understand their confusion because, as Renee said, a lot of things that are associated with our iCloud accounts, like iMessage and photos, those things are sort of end-to-end encrypted. But it really didn't surprise me that people were. I thought it was all locked down and secure because Apple has pushed this angle of privacy. But they don't often get into, and I mean, for good reason, they don't often get into the little nuances because people would start nodding off and going to sleep.
Yeah.
There's a certain degree where this is all very critical to learn about for a lot of people, but it can also be incredibly boring. So no, I mean, it didn't shock me that people weren't aware. I would say there are certain types of people that I would say are more technologically aware just of the day-to-day stuff, that it did shock me that they didn't know that, because we've known that Apple hasn't encrypted backups fully for years.
Yeah, Renee, I think, had an article way back in 2017 that talked about his wish list of
and it happened in 2015.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not that they don't encrypt backups. It's that they're not end-to-end encrypted. They're not fully locked down, but they are protected.
They're shared
like
key,
Yeah, and actually, Renee, maybe can you do a little bit of clarifying here? When we were on MacBreak Weekly together last week, we got into the nitty-gritty of this. But for people who didn't listen to that show and who are listening now, can you explain how there are some things that are end-to-end encrypted and some things that aren't? And then tell us what those are.
Yeah, sure. Well, one thing, let me just go back for a second, because I think one of the things I think the article from Reuters was a bit of a gotcha, because they wanted to first show that Apple was making this big public stance about protecting us from the FBI, but secretly giving our backups to FBI, which has never been a secret, because the same articles that always said they were fighting also said they'd already given the iCloud backups. But also the shocker to me, if it's true, my understanding is it is not true. They contended that Apple was deliberately not providing encryption because the FBI asked them not to, not because of the customers. My understanding is that is completely false. If that were true, that would be shocking and totally unacceptable, and I think would damage Apple's reputation and their relationship with customers. I hope it's not true. I've heard, but for years, I've heard it's not true. I still hear it's not true, but that's a damaging allegation to make. To your point, almost all of iCloud is end-to-end encrypted, and that means only you have the key. Only you can unlock it. Even Apple can't get into it. The exception is iCloud backups. Within iCloud backups, there's another exception, which is health data and keychain data and a few other things are still end-to-end encrypted, because Apple believes those, again, are more damaging to you if they get out than if you lose them. Like, you can start your health app over again, but if someone gets a hold of all your health data, that's very private and personal data. Or if they get access to your passwords, they can go rampant through your accounts. So it's better that you need to start from scratch and go through that headache than for someone else just to get all your stuff. So that is totally locked down. They're still rolling out messages in the cloud, and it's still a bit of a mess. It still hasn't reached Apple Watch, as far as I know. And it had a problematic and delayed launch. But right now, it's incredibly confusing because, and I might have said this backwards on MacBreak Weekly, so I want to make sure I get it right now. Messages in the clouds is sort of working separately from iCloud backup. If you turn on both iCloud backup and messages in the cloud, your messages in the cloud key is stored in your iCloud backup, so it can be recovered. If you turn on messages in the cloud and turn off iCloud backup, your messages in the cloud key is stored on your device. So everything will still sync. You'll still have all your messages everywhere, but you're in charge of the security. And if anything goes wrong, you're starting over with your iCloud messages sync.
Yeah. So actually, to be extra uber end-to-end encrypted, you would turn on message sync, turn off iCloud backup, and then start using a hardwired backup for iCloud to get you where you need to be.
Yeah. The Mac and PC backup is, you can still press a little button and make it encrypted.
Yeah.
I was going to say iTunes, but that's not how you do it anymore, is it? Not with Catalina.
It is for PC.
It's
is that still for
now.
PC people, though? Are PC
That's
people
true.
still using iTunes?
Yes.
I think. Yeah.
I think that's still the option for PC. And then encrypt that backup when you, when you do a hardwire backup. And that's actually, interestingly, that's the only way your health data and watch backups will transfer when you do a wired backup, is if you encrypt that backup.
Yeah. And your keychain.
Yep. So
I guess if your health data is always encrypted, so if something went wrong and let's say there are people out here, and I am not like this because I don't give a doohickey about my exercise activities, unfortunately, but I know people who are very proud of closing their rings every single day. So if they lost that portion of an iCloud backup and couldn't get that back, does that mean that they've lost 2 years worth of activity ring closing and they would just have to start over?
So the only difference, it's still backed up. So the only difference is Apple can't get to, it's a little binary blob. So if Apple turns over your backup to the FBI, for example, they'll see a lot of your stuff, but they won't see the health data. They won't see the passwords. It's just an extra level of security. But yeah, it does mean that if you lose your access, you lose those
because
things.
you create your own PIN, right? When you do an encryption on your computer, a hardwired
your own password
encryption. You do, so that's the password that you have to remember for that, and that's where you're back in charge of the keys. You're the one holding the keys for that particular thing. Yeah, which I would actually have to believe that if there were anybody backing up that way and was very protective of their health data, they probably have a little Post-it note on their computer that reminds them of what that.
Well, so my concern is that we've kind of fetishized security. Like I really believe in security. I really believe in privacy, but we've made people think that it's an absolute, that you have to have it everywhere, instead of something that you should really closely think about, because you really shouldn't have it everywhere. if there is some information you have, and maybe like you're having an affair, maybe you are on, like, maybe you do work for a government agency, or you're a confidential informant or you're writing a newsletter that if somebody found out you were responsible for it, the nasty government would send, like, there are all sorts of reasons why you would want data secure. But for most people, it's just not, it's not that sort of thing. Like, yes, your password should be secure, your medical data, your financial, there are things that you should keep secure, but not everything. And it shouldn't be treated as, if it's not end-to-end encrypted, it's not good. That's, real-time communications, yes, because somebody can eavesdrop on you when you're sitting at a Starbucks. There's all sorts of things but not everything. So don't treat it like if it's not encrypted, it's not good. If losing it would be more damaging to you than having it stolen, do not encrypt it.
Renee, you brought up a point that I don't think anybody has talked about in all of this discussion over the last couple of weeks, which is the fetishization of security. I think there's a lot to be talked about here, a lot to unpack, which is we are kind of standing on our soapbox and riding our high horse about how we want our data protected and sacred and private, and we don't want Apple to give it to anybody. But we're also at the same time saying we also want you to be able to give us our, like, have a backdoor for me. I don't want you to have a backdoor for anybody else. But if I lose my data somehow, if I can't get back into my iPhone, I want you to be able to give me the key to iCloud backups. So we're kind of being, we're asking for something that can't exist in the real world, which is the ability to have end-to-end encrypted backups, but also have Apple get into that for us if we lose it.
We're being scared more than we're being educated is the problem. And it's fine, because the pendulum was too far the other way before. And then, like, Windows XP happened and Cambridge Analytica happened. Like, we didn't care enough about security and privacy. Now we might, like, now they're buzzwords that are scaring us, but we should get to a point where we're educated about them. It's like, you should have a lock on your door. In the old days in Canada, we didn't, but you really should have a lock on your door, but you shouldn't be standing in front of it with a railgun. Like, there's just like, there's degrees.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we shouldn't be leaving our door unlocked with our TV sitting right in front of it.
Carefully pre-packed it, yeah.
Yeah, and we shouldn't be. We also shouldn't be like locking down our houses with barred windows. Well, I guess in some areas you might want barred windows.
Or like mines, like putting mines out in your front yard is a step too far.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good phrasing, and something I hadn't really thought about is that right now, especially, we are kind of going overboard with the discussion of privacy and security of our data, which I think Renee, you and Georgia and I have been kind of talking about for years about how important our data privacy is, and how there's so many ways in which somebody's taking that from us without really explaining what they're doing. And we should
have the right.
The
right should be ours. Like, we should still be able to choose what to do with it, but the right should be ours to choose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Nobody should take that from us.
Yeah. So I think what you've got going on is this. It'd be great if Apple could somehow implement the ability to opt in. Renee, do you think there's a reason why that doesn't exist right now, and why Apple may never do that in the future? The opt-in to end-to-end.
That was one of the weird parts about the Reuters article, because it said like Apple started doing it 2 years ago, but then said they were going to stop a year ago. But a year ago is when Tim Cook said they were going to start working on it. So like the whole timeline is really weird there. But my understanding is that it's an ongoing discussion within Apple, and like Apple argues just like we do. Like, if you see fights on Twitter, that's what happens inside Apple. Like, the iPad should be really easy to use. No, it should be like good for nerds. No, it should be good for, and like they argue and fight and they come to agreements and then they work on things. And this is true. Like, people are saying we're going to lock our customers out, and they're saying, well, but it's important to do this, and it goes through cycles and they work on it, and then they're like, like AirDrop was the same thing. They did it once, and Steve Jobs was like, nope, too confusing. Did it a second time. Scott Forstall was like, nope, still too confusing. Did it a third time. Craig Federighi was like, ship it, and then they had to do it over because it was still too confusing. Thanks, Craig. So they have to make an implementation that still lets people like lets people do what they're doing now, provides them with the option for it, but does it in a considerate and forgiving way. And my guess is they haven't found something that they like yet. But I am super grateful with the Reuters article because it makes the discussion really public again, and there'll be a lot of pressure on Apple. If it was like 5th on their list of things to do after fixing all the iCloud bugs from iOS 13, that maybe, that maybe now instead of 5th, it's the 2nd thing on their list. And I should explain that I'm an extremist when it comes to this stuff. Like, I truly believe our devices contain so much personal information that they should have essentially the equivalent of Fifth Amendment protection against search and seizure. Most people don't think that. I don't think Apple's ever said that. I personally choose to believe that. And that would be even better, because then even though Apple could recover your backups, law enforcement would still have no right to subpoena them. So like, there's a lot of different solutions to this.
Yeah, there's a lot of different solutions. A lot of people that have opinions about what they think is the right solution. But I think you're right that Apple right now, there are people in that company that are sitting around fighting about what they think is the right way to do it.
Oh, and we talked about this too, because at the talk show, I think you and I were at the talk show a couple of years ago, and John said, like, why can't you use your passcode and your Touch ID on your iPhone? And Craig's like, we thought about it, but then we realized if you burnt your thumb, now you couldn't get into your phone. So we'd have to give you a recovery key. And then if you lost your recovery key, you'd be at your 5 attempts, and that phone would be a brick and all your stuff would be lost. And it's like, these features are all great, but we have to figure out how to make them work.
Right.
And that's the sort of stage I think that they're at, is figuring out how to make it work.
Yep. Yeah. And I think in all of these scenarios, the bottom line is human error. If there was a way to like remove human error from the equation, we could have all of this. But because we are the people who lose our special encrypted keys, it becomes it's on us to have that responsibility. And then when we lose that key, then we blame Apple for what we did wrong. And there doesn't seem to be like a happy in between that allows us to have that responsibility and also not blame Apple when we do lose our keys. So yeah.
It's also important to remind people that if they're at all concerned, just turn off iCloud backups, back up over iTunes, click that little, iTunes and or Finder, click that little button, and then nobody can take your stuff.
Yeah, I actually do. I do a backup. I don't actually encrypt it. I never encrypt it, but I do a hard backup onto my computer every once in a while, just to do it, just to remind myself how to do it.
It's always it's always what I do when I get a new iPhone or iPad is I transfer everything from an encrypted offline backup instead of downloading it from iCloud.
Yeah, so you may not have 2 years or 1 year, I guess, depending on how often you buy the device, worth of information, but you do have that one from that year ago or whatever when you first did it. So you at least have that much of the information. Yeah. Which is like, honestly, that's a great idea, because you might lose a year's worth of your kids' pictures, but you didn't lose your kid's entire life worth of pictures. You just lost that 1 year's worth, which it's still a really sad thing to have that happen, but not necessarily as bad as losing it all, for sure. So if you feel the desire to encrypt, that is definitely one option to do it, is to like kind of have an encrypted archive that you go back to every once in a while, instead of just constantly hardwiring your backup and then encrypting it. Yeah. Before we move on, I want to tell you a little bit about Thrifter. Thrifter is this week's sponsor. So Joe and Renee, can you hop on over to thrifter.com, do a little browsing, a little shopping. And while you're at it, I'll tell all of our listeners about Thrifter. Thrifter offers a fantastic way to save money on everything from gadgets to home goods by shopping based on value, not hype. You can sign up at thrifter.com to get thoughtfully selected tech deals from places like Amazon and Best Buy daily without all the fluff. So over at thrifter.com, Renee, have you seen something awesome that you would like to tell the world about?
I did, but I figured you're going to take the Power Beats Pro. So I'm going to say there's a Google Pixel 4 up to $500 off.
Whoa.
And that's still my go-to Android phone, although I'm thinking of switching to a different one, just because I think Google's not as pixely as it used to be. But it's still like, if you just want vanilla, if you are at all Android curious and you want a phone the way Google thinks a phone should be done, I think the original one didn't deliver the features it needed to for its price tag, but $500 off is a pretty sweet deal if you ever did want to experiment with a little something different.
And you get a $200 prepaid MasterCard. That's a pretty great deal. What about you, Joe? What do you see anything on here that you'd like to let everybody know about?
So we were talking a lot about backups and local backups, and there is this $20 off deal on this Seagate Barracuda 8 terabyte hard drive. That'd be great for something like a NAS or attached storage setup of some kind. And it's $130, which is great for 8 terabytes. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a really great discount. So because Renee already brought it up, I am going to mention you can get PowerBeats Pro refurbished. That's great that they're starting to do that. This deal is crazy. They're $130. That's 49% off at Best Buy. This is something that just popped up on the front page of Thrifter. I just opened up thrifter.com. right there on the front page. But I also wanted to mention a second thing because this is actually really incredible. One of my favorite Apple accessory makers, Pad & Quill, they specialize in beautiful handcrafted leather. They're having a 40% off store-wide, site-wide for Valentine's Day. It's already up there right now. You could get cases, duffel bags, sleeves, backpacks. I actually had this incredible overnight bag that was beautiful in leather. I ended up giving it away as a gift because it was too heavy for me because it's all leather, but man, it's gorgeous. So 40% up to 40% off for everything site-wide at Pad & Quill. These are all the kinds of things that you can find on Thrifter. It's anything from tech gear to home goods. It's not just focused on a tech related stuff. I know today we just mentioned a couple of different tech stuff, but it crosses the board of different things that you could get. And it's not just today's Amazon day of the deal. It goes into all the details. They scour the internet, literally scour the internet to find these amazing, great deals. Sometimes they bring to the party the special discount codes. For example, the Pad & Quill's Valentine's Day sale, you need to use a special coupon code, which I'm not going to tell you, so that you have to go to thrifter.com to get that coupon code if you want to get something from the Pad & Quill site to get that extra discount. That's something that Thrifter found, that they dug up. They have relationships with some of these companies that send them this information. So you'll get all of this great and wonderful stuff. You can get a newsletter that is handcrafted with very amazing special deals delivered to your door every day. You can go to thrifter.com, click on newsletter, and sign up for the newsletter to get that information. So thank you to Thrifter for sponsoring this week's episode of the iMore Show. So let me jump over real quick to talk about the fact that Monday, the 27th of January, is the 10-year anniversary of the launch of the iPad. Now, the iPad, I may have mentioned this before, it actually holds a very special place in my heart because I am here today talking to you about Apple because of the iPad. I had graduated from college with a degree in journalism, but I was working as an admin assistant because that was the first job I got out of school. And I was kind of floundering because I wasn't doing what I had gotten my degree in, and I really didn't like working as an admin. And I bought an iPad the day it came out. I had it delivered to my door on day one. And in fact, the timeline is actually weird. Maybe it wasn't day one because I remember that March Madness was happening. So either it took 3 months for me to get my iPad because of a backlog, or I didn't order it on day one, which I thought I did, but now I'm starting to question it. All I know for sure is that that I fell in love with this iPad immediately, started following Apple blogs that I had never followed before because of this iPad, found out that there are ways that you can make money writing about Apple products, and now here I am today. So for me, 10 years ago is when I started my career writing about Apple, thanks to the iPad. What about you, Joe? Do you remember the launch of the iPad?
I do remember the launch of the iPad. It stands out in my mind because it's from that era of Apple events before they streamed them, so we had to get everything by reading live blogs.
Yep.
And watching highlights afterwards and that sort of thing. Apple still posted events on their site, but I had to wait like until late in the day before I really could get straight from Steve's mouth at that point.
Mhm.
And I thought I remember thinking the event was really impressive. And it stood out because of the chair. You know, you talk about that event, everyone's going to talk about the chair. And I think they were really smart especially at the time, positioning it between an iPhone and a MacBook. You know, it was more mobile than a MacBook, but more capable than an iPhone because of the big screen.
Mhm.
And yeah, it was, you know, the first time in 3 years that I had instantly wanted a device, and then I wouldn't get one for like at least another year.
So you actually didn't get it right away. You waited a year before you spent the money on it, right?
Yeah, well, I didn't really no money to speak of at the time because I was wrapping up college.
Yeah.
Um,
I think I actually spent my like what I had left over from my college grant money to buy mine.
well, there you go.
Yeah.
The first I actually remember the first iPad I bought was an iPad 2, and it wasn't for me. I stood in line for 6 hours because my sister really wanted one, and then she paid me back
Oh, wow.
because she wasn't in town or something. So it was a kind of sprinkly, dreary March day, early March in Ohio.
Mhm.
It's a cold time. It's a cold time.
Renee, what about you? What kind of impact did iPad have on you 10 years ago? Do you remember the event launch and walking into the store or standing in line for 6 hours to buy one?
So I don't think I was at the event. I don't remember if Dieter was, but it was announced, and then Dieter and I decided that we'd write the review together. He was going to do hardware, I was going to do software, because it only launched in the US first, or at least Canada wasn't a launch country. I had to drive to Albany, New York. They get so angry about how you pronounce that. I had to drive there to get it. And I remember driving, it's about a 5-hour drive, I think. So I was driving south, went through customs. They said, "Why are you coming to the US?" I said, "To buy an iPad." And it was like an 80-year-old grizzly US customs. And he's like, "What?
What?
Just go." And then I went to Albany. I stood in line. I went in, I bought the iPad. I drove back. And back then, Canada was doing this push to get more customs agents. So they were all like hot young boys and girls, like just looked like supermodels, all dressed in uniforms. And I went up and she's like, what were you doing in the US? And I went to buy an iPad. She's like, "Oh, I'm so happy you said that. We've pulled over like 6 people trying to smuggle them in already." She's like, "Just park over there and then go inside and pay your duty." And she goes, "Which one did you get? Because we know like the Apple store in Albany had this many. The Best Buy had 4 of them. Did you get Wi-Fi? Did you?" And then I went inside and there was like the guy's like, "Which one did you get? Did you get Wi-Fi? Did you get cellular?" And he processed my GST payment. And then I went home and I unboxed it and I did like all my review stuff and I synced up with Dieter, and it was like the first big, because iMore, which used to be Phone Different, just launched right after the first iPhone event. So we didn't get to cover that. So that was our first big device launch. And the most ridiculous thing to me at the time is that some segment of iMore readers were incensed that we were covering the iPad because the name of the site had phone in it and the iPad wasn't a phone. And for a long time, we had to walk this line of not pissing off these phone-only devicists in the audience.
Yeah. The first job that I got was for a website that was dedicated to writing about the iPad. So I'm remembering now the separation back then, that a phone and a tablet were very different. And in the case of Phone Different, or was the iPhone different?
It was the iPhone blog by then.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So yeah, the iPhone blog. TB.
But it was the same software and they came out 6 months apart, so we could really do both, people.
Yeah, and today the thought of combining your discussion about iOS, when you say iPhone, iPad, iOS, it's all combined. That's just a given. Most of the time, if somebody says, I can't wait to get this thing on my iPhone, we all just assume that it's also on the iPad. It's more rare that things aren't available on both. And even with the separation of software now with iPad OS, it's still they're sort of one and the same in my mind. They're just these two devices that Apple covers, not a separate world, which also speaks to just the way we thought about things back 10 years ago when we were blogging, which was your website, whatever that is, writes about one very specific thing, not a bunch of different things. And iMore isn't the only site that has changed in that way. Mac Rumors is another example of that, just spreading out the coverage because there's more Apple out there. There was a time when the only thing Apple made was a Mac, and then then Apple made an iPod, and then Apple made an iPhone, and then an iPad, and then an Apple Watch, and it just kind of grows and grows and grows, and it's no longer that niche. Nobody wants to. Well, I'm not going to say nobody. There's less people in the world that only want to read about an iPhone than there are people that just want to read about everything that Apple does. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Do you remember I can't remember mine, which is why do you remember your make, model, and color back then? Did the original iPad come with white and black? I don't think it did. It was just black, right?
It didn't even background task because iOS 4.1 or whatever wasn't, the grand unification iOS wasn't out yet.
Yeah, that's right. It was so different back then. I remember a lot of my friends saying, they would either say, why do you want that? It's just a really big iPad or iPod. Or they would say, why do you want that? It's just a really big iPhone that you can't make phone calls on. That was the things that people said to me.
The fun thing that stick out to me is whether it's the old MacBook or the old iPad announcements. When they say it's just 13 pounds. Like, wait, what?
Yeah.
It's just 5 inches thick and it's just 13 pounds.
Go back and watch the old iPod first iPod announcement video, and you'll be
thing was a brick. It's the
deck of cards.
Nothing is as thick as that thing was. Yeah. I actually have a friend who still has that one. I don't think he can even use it anymore because it's so outdated, but he still has it.
The best friend Caldwell has one.
Oh yeah, probably. Yep. So yeah, the iPad turns 10. So I guess the next thing to maybe talk about with the 10-year anniversary of iPad is, what do you think of the changes that have been made over the past 10 years in terms of the hardware and the software? Joe, what do you think about the hardware changes?
Well, I think Apple's been, since the iPad 2, really, Apple was fairly consistent in its hardware evolution for the iPad. It started, the kind of flat sides with a little bit of curve on the back for the first gen, and then with the iPad 2, flat backs, slightly angled edges, and it just sort of evolved from there. And I appreciate the subtlety, but also definite improvement in the design language over time. I did not appreciate when they got rid of the hardware rotation lock switch. I still miss it.
You're lucky you still have a headphone. Oh wait, no, sorry.
Yeah. But the latest sort of design iteration that they've done with the third generation iPad Pros, kind of harkening back almost to the iPhone 4, iPhone 5 era of design, has really captured my heart, and I love it so much. And
I completely agree.
And the inclusion of USB-C on that model was, I think, a great step forward into making it more of a, real computer. I hesitate to use the term, but that's what people say. And it's been almost transformative in the way I can work. Just that one little change. It's actually a big change in the last year that I've been using it.
Yeah. In terms of the sort of straight edge that the iPad Pro from, I guess, 2 years ago, did they make that design change?
End of 2018.
Yeah. At the end of 2018, yeah. So that's the model that I have, and I completely agree with you. I am in love with that design, and I wish that all like the iPhones going forward. I know there's reasons why it's designed the way it is, but I would love to go back to that sort of straight edge kind of design. So Renee, what do you think about the way the software has evolved over the past 10 years? And give me sort of like a 2-part version, because part 1 would be just a bigger version of iOS, but not really. And then part 2 would be, we can talk about iPad OS, which I think is a really huge change from the past 10 years.
Yeah, I think it highlights one of the biggest internal battles Apple's ever had, and that was like the people who wanted to keep it simple and accessible, the computer for everybody else. You know, people who even found the Mac not approachable. It was just so simple. Tap an icon, press the home button, tap an icon, press the home button. So easy to understand. But then the other group of people who wanted it to be, to live up to its own full potential, not becoming a Mac, but being a modern way of doing everything a Mac does. And I think the lack of progress for years, up until recently, it was because of that sort of internal argument. And I think, that was around iOS 6 that started happening. And then Craig Federighi, he skews way nerdier than Steve and Scott ever did, pushed a lot of it forward, but it was still like, should it be its own thing? The Apple Watch got to have its own. They're all based on the same iOS foundations. They all have the same backboard, all those things. But the interface layer, like the Apple Watch has carousel instead of springboard, and the Apple TV has pineboard and headboard instead of springboard. And the iPad just always had what you said. It just had a big iPhone interface. I think they've made progress. I think a lot of the stuff they've introduced is good. I think they're still struggling with the usability because it is a handheld finger. Like you don't have a tiny mouse pointer. You have your big stubby, or at least in my case, giant stubby fingers, and trying to use all the stuff they have now, like trying to pull up, you got to swipe to pull up the dock, and you got to swipe again to go to mission control, but you can also swipe to bring apps into the multi-window model. But if you do it too long, it tries to pull them out of the dock or puts them into shaky mode. And I think there's way too much collision right now. And also a lot of the stuff is still only half implemented. Like you can plug in a lot of USB-C stuff, but it doesn't treat them all as well as a Mac treats them yet. Like there's display support, but not full display support. There's mouse support, but not full mouse support. So I think it's sort of like, I see you trying. I see you trying. A for effort, but let's bring this home now, can we? Let's just bring this on home. Daddy needs a fully functional iPad OS.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I actually took my iPad with me to CES and used only my iPad with the new Bridge keyboard with trackpad to see how well I could work without a Mac. I actually brought my MacBook Pro with me because I was worried that it was just going to fail completely. But I did manage to never even open my MacBook Pro, and I used my iPad Pro the entire time. And my biggest pain point, it turned out, was it really is the tabs thing. Like multitasking has come a long way, especially with iPad OS, but it still doesn't meet that sort of like quickly having your windows that you could just kind of click through and jump into. That was my one like multitasking pain point that I had. That it's not that I want Apple to support, random windows open everywhere on an iPad. I don't think that's going to be a good experience, but I do believe that there's got to be a way, and they made us step in the right direction with what they did with iPad OS. But I think that there is a way that we can that we can organize our windows without having to sort of like drag and drop and tap and spread out. It's beautiful looking, but it's almost too much work when all I want to do is just like quickly jump over. I've got Safari open and I've got my writing app open, but I wanted to really quickly jump into Airtable and check something out. I'd love to just go tap and I'm there instead of having to kind of like open multitasking, find that tab, click on that tab, spread that out. There's too many steps involved in that. So in terms of the growth of iPad, I think iOS 13 and iPad OS 13 was a huge, huge leap in the right direction for iPad meeting its full potential, as you say, Renee. But it's almost worse because they're so close at this point. I think it's going to get better, but we're in this phase of it's so close to being right there that it's frustrating that it's not right there yet. Whereas before we forgave it of all of the faults because it wasn't even close to right there,
So close, getting so close.
Getting so close.
Yeah.
So we are almost at the top of our hour, but we do actually have just before we move on to this, Joe, you wrote a wonderful editorial about
bring it up.
about your desire to have a 27-inch iPad. So let's talk about that a little bit.
I thought it was a 2.7-inch iPad. I'm so confused. No.
So what do you mean? Like, I know that the idea of a 27-inch iPad is a little bit far-fetched, but what do you mean by this?
So I've long thought that if Apple was going to do some kind of touch desktop or laptop, it would spring from iOS and now iPadOS rather than macOS, because I think bolting bolting touch onto a Mac is not going to be the best experience. Start with touch and then build sort of desktop experiences on that. And it's sort of my desire to see that kind of device, a device that would hopefully force them to really think about building out this touch operating system into a more, fully functional kind of man for all seasons kind of space that could work for both touch and more traditional computing. And I think it'd be great. Artists will take as big a canvas as you can give them. And I think, something like Microsoft Surface Studio is probably a more specialized piece of hardware, but then a 27-inch iPad is going to be a specialized piece of hardware. And Apple doesn't really make things like that right now. They cater more to like mainstream needs for the most part. I mean, I say that, and they just released a Mac Pro that most people are never going to buy. But I think, and maybe it won't be 27 inches, but I think 21 inches is actually more realistic. iPad kind of feels like a safer space for them to experiment of all their product lines, because the iPhone's so tied into their quarterly fortunes, and the Mac is really tied into the hearts of a lot of longtime Apple fans, so don't really want to screw with that too much. See Touch Bar. But the iPad, I think, really, and now iPadOS, now that iPadOS is its own thing, it really gives them room to play a little more. And that's something I hope, like, bigger iPads and a longer time of iPadOS just existing will let them do, is really just experiment in public for the first time in a while.
Yeah. So I think when I did read a couple of the reader comments about that particular article, which we're going to link in the show notes so that you can read it too. One of the questions that came up is the cumbersomeness of something that big. So let's even get smaller. And you kind of talked about a 17-inch iPad as the sort of like, you remember the 17-inch MacBook and how great that was. Even though it was big, it actually was really a really great size device for a lot of people. And couldn't the iPad be something like that? But that's big. That's almost 5 inches larger than the largest iPad. Address that a little bit, this idea that, well, that's too big, that's too heavy. How could Apple kind of accommodate our own perception of what an iPad is? Because right now our perception of an iPad is this thing that you hold in your hand and you tap on it and maybe you use a pencil and do stuff, but it's in your hand the whole time.
Yeah, well, I mean, part of that perception is of what an iPad is going to have to, like, if we do want to see, bigger sizes, it is going to have to change. Maybe the larger iPad is something you can use something you primarily use on your desk. But I think it's all about trade-offs. I mean, people who got the 17-inch MacBook Pro knew they were getting a behemoth of a laptop, so they were prepared for it. So, customer education is going to be important. As long as people know this, I mean, it's still an iPad, but it's big. It's just a honking big machine.
Not everybody's going to want this.
No, and that's why it's great that things like the iPad Mini and the iPad Air exist. And if they did a much bigger iPad, the iPad Air is really going to live up to its name. It's going to be still super light compared to all that.
Yeah.
And I just think that I think people who want that sort of device, it is going to be more of a niche product. So people who are going for it are going to be more aware of what they're getting.
Yeah.
Be more willing to make that trade-off.
Just like people who would buy a Mac Pro. It's the same kind of idea.
Exactly.
Not everybody's going to get the Mac Pro, but people who get the Mac Pro understand that it's actually not expensive. It's a really good deal. In this way, people who get a 17 or larger inch iPad would actually know this is going to be heavy. It's not meant to be carried around the way another size iPad would be.
Oh, yeah.
Renee, what about you? Do you want, would you buy a 17, 21, 27 inch iPad?
Yeah, I mean, I would buy it. I don't know. I'm curious how much I'd end up using it, but I would definitely buy it. And like friend of the show, friend of iMore, Mark Edwards, designer behind the I want to say Bajango, but I keep saying Bayango, Apps Mas Macho. But like he said, he wants a 120-inch iPad because he just wants it to be his desk, and he wants to be able to do everything with like an Apple Pencil and an iPad. And there are use cases. They're much smaller. The market is much smaller, so Apple would have to use that magic spreadsheet to see how much. How many of them they could sell to see whether it's worthwhile making them. But I would love, like capital L, all caps, love a bigger iPad. And I had a 17-inch MacBook. It was a behemoth. It was a battleship. I'm really happy with the new 16-inch MacBook, but the whole point of a screen is to be a screen. Give them to me big.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
The iPad is all screen.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. Well, we are at the end of another hour of the iMore show. Joe, thanks so much for joining us today. It was really great having your voice on here. It was wonderful to hear what you had to say about all the various things that we talked about today. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you to all of the people who showed up. Once again, we are a day early, and I apologize on the one hand that we keep changing our schedule up, but we thank you for those of you that popped in today and joined us last minute for this live episode. We love seeing your names there all the time, so thank you so much. And thank you to all of our listeners that listen every week. We literally wouldn't be doing this without you, and we know that you're out there. We know that you're listening to us, and so we're very grateful to have you on board, listening to our shows every week, telling us when you don't notice that our show popped up, and let's get on the ball and light a fire under our butts so that we'll get out there and do our podcasts weekly. And thanks to Jim Metzendorf for all of the things that you do to make us sound good, to make our recordings come out. By the way, Jim is the guy who makes sure that these come out almost immediately after we record them live. He goes in, edits them, makes them perfect, drops them into iTunes, and you get to listen to them later that same day, a day later at the most, because of Jim. So thanks to Jim for all the things he does for us. And we do record the show usually every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern time. Every once in a while, we'll have to make some changes. Like this week, we recorded on a Thursday. Sometimes we have to push back the time, but you can always follow us on Twitter. At iMore, that's where we will be tweeting. If we have any early shows or any late shows, you'll be able to find out from there. So every time we do an episode of the iMore show live, we will tweet out a couple of minutes ahead of time that we're about to jump in and do that, so that you can join us live if you want to. Otherwise, you can look for us every week. And have a great rest of your week, and we'll be talking to you again. Hopefully Georgia will be back with us next time. And actually, that reminds me, Joe Keller, where can people find you on the social meds?
That phrase.
I'm never going to stop saying it. It's hilarious.
People can find me at jkeller87 on Twitter, and that's pretty much where I am.
No TikTok?
No TikTok. I'm not. No. Leave TikTok to the teens, is what I say.
Renee Ricci, if people want to find you, where can they find you on the social meds and around the internet? Because you're more than just socialing it up.
No, I'm at Renee Ricci on all the social things. I don't have a TikTok yet either, but Lori and I should totally start one. You can also find me at imore.com/vector, or if you want the moving pictures, at youtube.com/vector.
Which I highly recommend, again, you check out. I'm sure everybody that listens to the show has already subscribed to Renee's channel, but I'm telling you, every time we talk about something this week, it's it's most of the time because Renee had done some amazing video that deep dives this kind of stuff. So you definitely want to subscribe to Vector if you haven't already, which I hope everybody that's listening already has. If you want to get in touch with me on the social medias, you can find me at Appaholic on Twitter. That's APPAHOLIK, and at Lori Gill at most of the other social things. If Georgia Dow were here, she would tell you that you can find her videos at anxiety-videos.com. Wait, I actually have this written down. I can tell you for sure. I want to get this right.
Don't let it make you anxious.
It's anxiety-videos with an s.com. And you can find her at the social things not quite as often because she doesn't like to participate in the Twitter exchanges all that often, but sometimes you can find her at Georgia_Dow. Don't forget the underscore. And thanks again for listening. We'll see y'all next week. And the broadcast